you can go ahead and drop those questions in. We'll have time at the end to get to those questions, I hope. If we don't, there is going to be contact information that we'll provide to you at the end as well. So without further ado, I do want to let you know that we are recording this just so that we can use clips of it in the future. So you'll see that that is active. And in the meantime, I'm going to open this up to Dr. Nathalie Edmond to get us started.
Well, welcome all of you, wherever you're zooming in from. I'll just share my screen. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, so I am the director of the Counseling Center at Villanova. I started here in July of last year, so it's definitely been a transitional year for me, so I can relate to all of you all who are preparing to launch your kids out into the college world. And so it's been a great year, and I'm excited to share some of those things here with you all. So I like this idea of talking about resilience. I think it's a word that's used a lot. And I think we all have resilience within us, and resilience is something we can build. And I think I'm a big believer that our students need to build that resilience as young adults, as for the rest of their life. And I think that as parents or caregivers or supporters of young adults, that the more we support ourselves in these transitions, and all the places that our loved ones will go, that just creates more support for our students. So when I think about what have we learned about mental health, particularly since the pandemic, which I think was very difficult for many people, is that we see how our students are being impacted with over 80% dealing with some sort of anxiety. About 63% have worse emotional health than before the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think part of that could be that this time period of the pandemic where people were being educated remotely, and some went on to be remotely educated for more than a year, that there's some skills and some particularly social skills, but also anxiety that just was fermenting and continues in our digital age. There's been a lot of racial unrest that kind of peaks and goes down. A lot of polarization we're seeing. About 20% identify with having had suicidal thoughts. 60% talk about difficulty coping with stress in a healthy way. A lot of difficulty with concentration. That may mean ADHD, that may not mean ADHD. 63% are struggling with depression. Almost 70% experiencing social isolation and loneliness. And so thinking about what does it mean to be in this internet generation, this I generation, where they have spent their whole life with a smart device of some sort, and that the ways in which that they communicate and get support may be different than our generation, whatever generation we are in. So how can we build resiliency and support and recognize that even though the pandemic is over, that the legacy of it lives on, whether it's that we have an immunocompromised system, whether there were skills or traumas or grief that we experience during the pandemic, losing loved ones, or just some of us who struggle with transition. So when I think of resilience, I think of many different things. So I think of what is our belief about ourselves? Do we have a belief that we can cope with the stressors that are in our life? Do we believe that we are skillful, that we are intelligent, that we can find the answers that we need, or do we feel like we're an imposter sometime? Do we feel like we can regulate our emotions, or do we feel like our emotions rule us? How good are we at adapting? How willing are we to adapt? I think about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And so what does it mean to be recognizing that change is a constant, and that there are going to be disappointments, there are going to be failures, that things aren't always going to come easily to us. And I think that what happens for certain students is that as they transition into college, that when they're perhaps in high school, they maybe do really well. And maybe for some students, good grades comes easily to them. And then they're kind of at the top of the curve. And then when they come to college, where they're amongst many students who are kind of at the top of the curve, they may find that they have to put in more effort, or that the structure of high school was really supportive of the way that their brains work and their study habits, and that they have to adapt to how they can be successful in college, which might mean changing majors, or that might mean getting more support, or going to tutoring, or going to the counseling center, things that they may not have had to do in high school. Willingness to be flexible, because we think about when you're rigid or unwilling to make changes, that can increase stress as well. Ability to solve problems, so whether that's you can solve it on your own, or that means that you can be able to access the resources on campus and in our support systems to solve problems. How emotionally aware are we? How emotionally intelligent are we? Do we know how we're feeling? Can we listen to our body and what our body is telling us we need in terms of right amount of sleep, right amount of nourishment, right amount of exercise? And when we recognize that we're feeling some sort of way, do we have healthy ways of channeling that energy? Can we identify the right social support systems that we need for whoever we are in this season of our life? And can we bring some humor into our daily life? So some things I like people to kind of think about that contributes to resilience is we're all born with a temperament, meaning that, you know, some people describe babies as like, oh, he was such a good baby, right? And what does that actually really mean, right? Is that about ability to sleep through the night? Is that about not colicky, non-anxious baby, easy to take care of? So just thinking about like, what are people's temperaments, right? Some of us are born more introverted, some more extroverted. Some of us are more slow to warm up. Some of us have a nervous system that is agitated or anxious. We're kind of wired to more of the depressive side, or more wired more to the anxious side or agitated side. And that's something we're just born into this life with. And then our environment kind of helps support us. And sometimes it's not always a good fit between the temperament we have and the environment that we're raised in. And so what's the attitude that we bring into our daily life, right? That some of us are more pessimistic, some of us are more optimistic, some of us are more realist, some of us kind of have a cynicism to which we approach life, and some of us, kind of are eternally hopeful. And so just thinking about how attitude plays a role as well. I mentioned a little bit about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. That growth mindset usually brings more capacity and more resilience. You know, thinking about this nervous system that we all have, that our body is constantly taking information from the environment, and we're always looking for cues of safety and cues of danger. And that's happening at a body level. That's not even like on a conscious level. That's always happening. And our mind is tuning into what those cues of danger and cues of safety are. So for some people, you know, when they come to college, they feel right at home, right at ease. And others feel like, oh, this place is too big, or everybody seems to know each other, or they don't find their people right away. You know, what's the mood that we have, and what are our emotions, and differentiating the difference between mood and emotions, right? That mood is more of a state of being for a couple of weeks. It could be for the day, versus emotions is more like moment by moment, how am I feeling? So I love to bring in mindfulness, right? So I'm someone who's been trained, you know, as a psychologist for over 20 years, more specifically a trauma therapist. I spent a lot of my career helping people heal from trauma. I believe in the mind, body, spirit integration, and that our spiritual side is just as important as our emotional and our cognitive side. That 500-hour trained yoga teacher, because I think being in our bodies is really important. That if we spend too much time just in our heads, we're missing out on important information that our body will tell us. And I spent a lot of years also doing a lot of consulting around like, how do we create places and environments that support inclusion, belonging, that we support people of all identities, that we recognize the history of racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia. And we recognize that that we have all kinds of abilities. Some of us are neurodiverse, some of us have disabilities, and how do we create an environment where all of us can thrive? So this mindfulness of, how do we come into this moment just as it is and build awareness, compassion, curiosity, and reduce judgments that get in the way of the quality of our life. And how does it help? How does mindfulness help us respond versus reacting, but also help us participate in life more fully? And how do we pay attention to all the ways in which we organize our experiences? So the sensations would be like on a body level. How can I know how I'm organizing what just happening? Some of us see the world more in images. Some of us are more connected to our feelings than others. Some of us are more aware of the thoughts that we're having, and we know that we get lost in thought at least 60% of the time. I think about vibes or vibrations, which is, when I enter a room, what's the vibe that I get about this place? And then thinking about all the behaviors and movement that we engage in, some of them subtle and some of them pretty overt. And so all of these ways of organizing live inside of us. And counseling and therapy are great ways of becoming more mindful of how all of these 6 areas work together. And how do we build the muscle that if we spend a lot of time in our heads, how can we connect more to our feelings? And that builds resilience, right? That sometimes we think we should avoid our feelings, but actually moving towards feelings gives us actually more control, more skills for dealing with the world and what it throws at us. So I think about, how do thoughts, feelings, behaviors, how the ways that we cope, how do all of these things connect, but also what are avenues in which we can be engaging and building that muscle. So the thing I like about mindfulness is really that when we practice mindfulness on a regular basis, it gives us more choices. It helps us recognize that there's a space between the thing that's happening and how we respond. And that leads to more freedom. And we don't have to be swept away by our feelings. And we can respond more from a place of wisdom and kindness rather than habit and reactivity. And one of the things we talk about at Villanova is veritas, unitas, and caritas. And so this idea of like finding truth, recognizing we're all in community together, and like, how do we lead with love? And that's part of the values that we're trying to develop here. So I think about how scary it can be with being with emotions that are uncomfortable. Like I think about if you have a student or you yourself are more prone to depression or more prone to anxiety, how it can be hard to become friends with those emotions. But I'm a big advocate for becoming friends with our emotions. And I like the way that self-compassion people talk about how do we move beyond just tolerating emotions or tolerating discomfort to accepting it as like, that's just part of life. And then what does it mean to welcome emotions like anxiety or fear? What does it mean to embrace it? And what does it mean to celebrate fear? Because if we think about emotions, they all have a function and they are all messengers in some way. They give us information about how we're reacting to the world. And so how do we, when I think of tolerate, I think of tensing up my body. And then when I think of celebrate, there's more of a ease and joy that comes with that. And you may never love feeling incredibly fearful or anxious, and yet what's the information we can get from that? And thinking about how our brains, right? We have some people talk about the lizard brain, which is that part of the brain that we share with animals. And that part of the brain is a little bit more primitive, but that, the part of our body that's always scanning the environment for danger. And we need our frontal cortex online. And that frontal cortex is that part of our brain that doesn't fully develop until our mid-20s. So if we think about our students, their brains are still developing. All of our brains are still developing. But, when you get to age 25, the frontal cortex is more developed, which is the impulse control, the executive functioning, the being able to long-term plan. So in many ways, caregivers, parents, all the supports at the university, we're all trying to help be the frontal cortex to help support our students as they make these huge transitions into adulthood. And thinking about when we're overwhelmed by emotions, it's hard for the frontal cortex to be online. And so how do we help decrease people's anxiety, decrease people's emotional states, which doesn't mean don't have feelings, but let's move it into people's window of tolerance. So I think about students coming into college. There's something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, which looks at what are some vulnerabilities that students may encounter before the age of 18 that impacts their physical health, their emotional health, makes them more vulnerable to disease or to mental health issues. And so we can think about abuse. Different kinds of abuse are adverse childhood experiences, neglect, loss of loved ones, experiencing significant challenges while growing up, whether it's observing a parent with mental illness or having parents go through divorce, or having substance use issues, or the death of a parent or incarceration of a parent, but also bullying, community violence, neighborhood safety, racism, living in foster care. So these are all vulnerabilities, right? That can be, some people would describe them as traumas. And all of this is impacting how people are learning, how safe they feel in the world, the resilience that they've built, right? That these adverse childhood experiences happen. And if we have the right support, we can help support our students to get through these things. So when I think about building resilience, I think of how do I expand people's optimal arousal zones, right? When are people in the zone where they feel safe and social, they can learn, they can connect with people? When are they in a state where it's they're hyper aroused, right? So they're reactive, they're hypervigilant, maybe they're rageful, maybe they're having panic attacks, maybe they're obsessing and worrying. Maybe they're kind of in a fight or flight mode, and versus hyperarousal, which is a different way of shutting down, conserving energy, a little bit more depressive, a little bit more numb, disconnected. And we all have an optimal window of tolerance based on our life experience, based on temperament, based on support skills we've learned. And the beauty of neuroplasticity of our brains and nervous system is we can keep expanding our window of tolerance. When I think of resilience, I think of how are we expanding people's capacity to be present, to be flexible, to experience joy, to connect with other people. And what are the things that trigger people out of their window of tolerance? And what are the supports that they need? This is just a different way of kind of looking at these different zones of our nervous system. And so thinking about for you, just taking a moment to think about for yourself, how often am I in that green zone, that optimal window of tolerance where I feel safe and social? I might get triggered, but my frontal lobes are online where I can soothe myself or calm myself or reorient myself so that I don't do things that are not in my best interests. Versus when am I in that yellow zone? Or some people would say red zone, where I'm mobilize into action. I'm in the sympathetic, like I have to defend myself. I have to do. I'm worrying a lot, right? That there's different degrees of, a little bit of anxiety is helpful because it usually mobilizes us into action. Too much anxiety can paralyze us. And so how can I have just the right amount of emotion that it gets me to do what I need to do to get my task done? And then versus like that blue zone, which is more depressive, more a sense of I can't get things done. And all of these are healthy zones. We need them all, but we want to keep expanding our window of tolerance. And this is just a different visual for people who, like to think of this in like a different way. And you hear people kind of talk like in the social emotional learning world, like the red light, yellow light, green light. And at red light, we want to kind of be like really alert, like there's some sort of danger in the environment that we need to, we feel overwhelmed or in terror mode. So with all that in mind, so when we think about young adults, right, in that 18 to 25 range or 17 to like 25 range, right, that we know that their brains are still developing, that their family of origin is critically important. You all are really important. That we want to help support them have increasing independence and individuation. We want them to be working towards like a sense of that I can attitude. And that might mean a little anxiety, right? So how can we support them in having some of those independent experiences so they can make mistakes, they can struggle, they can figure out how to access resources? That we know that gender is much more fluid in many ways in this generation. And so they're experimenting with how they express their gender, what pronouns are affirming of who they are. They're also exploring their sexuality and identifying what all of that means and how do they take what they've learned from family and society and figure out what makes sense for them. They may be exploring their own self as a racial being. They're looking at exploring school and work and competence, and they're making friendships, and they're falling in love, and they're having breakups and heartaches. They're really trying to figure out, what does it mean to be leaving a place? High school is many things to different people. And so some people are having the time of their life in high school. Others are, it's been a place to tolerate. Others, they've had a lot of harm. So how do they make peace with the past and start anew? And then, evaluating one's relationship to technology with these smart devices that are a great source of connection and knowledge, but also can also be really harmful, but also distracting. How do they look at their relationship to food and to the body, and making sure that they're nourishing themselves in the right way, but also feeling good in their body and their body image. Thinking about, this being a faith institution driven by Augustinian Catholic values, thinking about how people are making sense of where religion and spirituality fits in their world. And we know that, we want everyone at Villanova to be successful. And we recognize that there are a lot of different reasons why people may struggle. And we're continually looking at like, what can we do differently to help build supports and resilience? And I think about how when people are struggling or navigating transitions, that we each have different ways of processing that and coping. Some of us love to cope on our own. So I'm one of those people. I'm a self-regulator. So when I'm upset, I usually like to go off by myself and like do my own thing. And then, then I'm willing to socialize. And others are interactive regulators, right? And that's my sibling, right? They really appreciate calling a friend, calling me, texting, and they appreciate being in relationship at those times of stress and need. So this thinking about for each of you, are you more of a self-regulator? Are you more of an interactive regulator? And when you think about your loved one, you're a college student, like, Are they more of a self-regulator or interactive regulator? I don't think one is better or worse than the other. I just think it's good to diversify, because if you're a self-regulator, you can't always be by yourself, perhaps, in those moments of stress and emotion. So can you reach out for support to others? Can you be with other people? And if you're an interactive regulator, there won't always be somebody else around. And so can you find ways to self-soothe? And that's also part of building resilience. I love this like idea of validation, right? That we as human beings like to be validated. We'd rather be validated than punished or shamed. And I think about, I came from a family, my parents are Haitian immigrants, and so I'm the first generation born here. And I think about a lot of the wonderful things that they taught me to help me build my resilience and help me get this far. But they also kind of had a suck it up mentality, which was helpful in building resilience. And it would have been nice for them to be a little bit more validating sometimes, right? And so how do we do both the validation, I hear what you're saying, or versus going into fix it mode. And so I invite you each to think about, are you more of on the validating side? Or are you more on the let's problem solve side? And how do we make room for both? And so thinking about what are the different ways we can validate people. Sometimes just being present is a way of validating people. Sometimes we get distracted or we're checked out, we're not fully present. Sometimes just reflecting back what we heard, paraphrasing what we heard the person say, makes them feel seen and heard. Sometimes we don't always know how we're feeling, but maybe we can intuit or get a sense of how that person might be feeling based on what they're doing or saying. How can we make sense of how they're feeling based on what we know about their history, or just normalize, to be an emotional person there's nothing wrong with that. And lots of people feel that way. And then what are ways that we can also be vulnerable and just name that we too, right? And so thinking about how important validation is, in addition to helping build problem solving skills. I love this healthy mind platter, associated with Dan Siegel, who's a physician who talks about the importance of mindfulness, but also the importance of having these ingredients in our life in addition to properly nourishing ourselves. So I invite you to think about, how can you support your loved one in building these skills around getting the right amount of sleep that they need for their bodies, getting the amount of exercise or physical time that's supportive of their bodies, the right amount of focus time. So we don't want them to be studying all day, but we want them to study enough to get their work done and to feel accomplished. The importance of relationship and connecting with people in real life or on the phone, that there's just something different about that than just texting or social media. You need to have playtime and creativity time and connect to the child part of ourselves. We need some downtime, some unscheduled, unproductive time. We need time in, and that is time for self-reflection. That could be prayer, that could be journaling, that could be yoga, that could be meditation or mindfulness. It could just be a moment to pause at the beginning or the end of the day, or as we're transitioning from one meeting or one event to something else. So thinking about, I think of it as 8 ingredients, with the food pyramid kind of being the 8th ingredient, is noticing, do I have all 8 on my platter? Or are there some things that when I start to get a little stressed or I don't have that much time, I let slide away? And how can I have all of these ingredients in my life and know which ones are easier and harder? But all of these ingredients will help us build resilience, right? Because when we're tired, it's harder to cope with life, and we're more vulnerable to our emotions. If we're not eating enough, we're not eating the right stuff that's going to nourish us and keep us alert. That's not, if we're all work and no play, that's a problem. If we're all play and no work, that's a problem. If we're lonely and disconnected and we don't have our people to go to or to hang with, that's a problem. If we're always going, and we don't have enough time to check in with ourselves and how we're doing, that's can be a problem too. So the Holloway Counseling Center at the university, right? We're here year round. And 2 years ago, we started partnering with YouWill, which is a third-party vendor that offers 24/7 telehealth. We know that since the pandemic, telehealth has been on the rise, and some students come to college already with a therapist that they're going to continue to work with. Others don't really want to come to the counseling center. They just want to connect. It's already included as part of their benefit as being a student once they come to Villanova, and so they can just access through the YouWill site, which is a great service. And there's even like a crisis line, so if people need urgent access to a provider to help sort through whatever problem that's available. The counseling center offers individual counseling. We try not to make students wait more than 2 weeks for an appointment, but we also have drop-in appointments, which are appointments that people can come to. They can call or drop in or do an online appointment request, and we have slots within 48 hours. It's a great way to, if you just have a problem that you want to address, that's a great slot. We also do individual counseling. We have a care coordinator that can help access resources in the community if someone wants to see a provider off campus. We have lots of amazing groups. One of the groups that I run is the DBT skills group, which is so much about how do we build skills to deal with all the different emotions that we feel and how do we build mindfulness. We also do consultation. So as parents or caregivers, you can call the counseling center to talk about some things related to concerns you have about your loved one. And, we also know that, we might not be able to disclose without a release of information what we learn about your loved one, but that we're always a resource. We also have an integrative care team, which has been new this academic year, which is basically a multidisciplinary team addressing disordered eating and eating disorder concerns, because we think it's so important to have a team approach to helping solve so many of the issues that students struggle with. So that just gives you a little sense of the counseling center and all the ways we're trying to build resilience and partner with different campus resources to really support the health and well-being of your loved ones. So that's all I've got for today. Happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Sure. Nathalie, there's a couple that popped in. I'm also a parent here, so a couple of the points. Thank you, first of all. I think it's timely, and I think we're all always wondering how we can further support our loved ones. But a couple of questions that did pop in. What can a parent do? What are maybe 3 things that a parent could do to support their child as they build this resilience? We're not here on campus, so it's a FaceTime call, it's an email or a text, sometimes urgent. What can we do on that receiving end that's helpful to a student and to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I would say, I think part of the reason I shared a little bit about validation is I think it can be activating as a parent or loved one to get one of those texts or FaceTimes. Right. I think about, I have a 14 and 16-year-old, so I haven't launched them yet, but I think about like times that I've sent them away to sleepaway camp. And I don't know if anybody else has ever gotten those like messages of like, I want to go home, I'm miserable here, or like, and so I think about like what gets activated in me and like the desire maybe to rescue or the desire to say like, suck it up, either way. And I think about how can we be validating, right? Like acknowledge the pain point for the student, the struggle that they're having. And how do we know like when we just need to be a sounding board that they can talk to without us needing to like intervene? And when is it helpful to intervene because maybe they don't have the resources or the skill? But to think about, there's so many resources on campus, and I think it becomes like, some students it takes a while for them to like settle in, and others are, you know, are at a place where they need immediate support because what they're struggling with isn't the ordinary like transition issues. It's like actually like a mental health crisis that they need support. And so I think about like, you know, your loved ones pretty well, and to try to help support them and tease out like being their frontal cortex of like, okay, like validate first, because we humans need validation, and then like how can we help them activate, like maybe they can come in for a drop-in appointment at the counseling center just to talk through. Doesn't mean they need to commit to therapy, but just come and talk about that stuff, or encouraging them maybe to go to an event on campus, especially those first few weeks of college where there's so many activities going on. It's fairly structured, particularly in that orientation period. If we know that our loved ones struggle with anxiety, how can we get them some support now to just be talking through I think of like a cope ahead plan of like, how do they anticipate what might happen related to that? If we know that our loved one struggles with mental health issues, how can we have a plan ahead of time of, will they be seeing someone at the counseling center? Do they need referrals? Will they be able to keep seeing the person that they see here? Might they need some accommodations? So those would be like 3 or 4 things I would think about, like that we can support our loved ones.
Great, because I think so many times, I know I'm guilty of it, and maybe not guilty isn't the right word, but that wanting to fix right away, and learning the resources that are on campus, both at the counseling center, but then also within each of the colleges, that students can also reach out to their individual undergraduate offices within their colleges if that academic support is needed as well. That's always important to remember and to remind the students of. I know I've had to do that a few times with my daughter. You touched on that initial part of college. I know that we're into April, and the end of the semester is on the horizon, and next year is coming. And I like that idea of that plan ahead. I thought I jotted that down. What are some of the things that students can do if they aren't adjusting, that we as caregivers and parents can recommend that Villanova does have? I know you have this great screen on top of here. But what else can we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the RAs I think are great in terms of like who's like, if living on campus, like thinking about like who's on their floor and who's there. I think especially because in the orientation period, there's so much support. But I also think that, it goes back to that self-regulator versus interactive regulator, like those who like to do things by themselves, right? Like are probably not going to want to go access some of these resources perhaps. So it's almost like, how do I get myself to do the opposite of what I feel like doing it because I think it's going to be effective. But I also think like the Dean of Students office, I think, often, unless people are very clear about their major at the very beginning, they may not necessarily in that first year first semester be connected to a college per se. But I think about like, how do we begin to think about like the Office of Student Involvement, the Bandana Project, that there's a lot of student organizations. And I just invite people to, if they can, to buddy up and go try all the offerings that are there on campus, to maybe say, okay, I'm going to try to do one thing this weekend or one thing this week that's social, right? And sit with the discomfort of that. That most things require a little bit of discomfort in order to have the success that we want. So I just think about finding that caring adult, and maybe even upperclassmen who have probably navigated those before, and could be a great support about, more than likely, whatever you're experiencing, somebody else has also experienced it. And so how do we decide to be a little bit vulnerable and share? Because I think there really is an attitude on campus, particularly with staff and faculty, around supporting people and being able to thrive. And so many great places like learning support services, and like there's so many great places on campus. Mission and ministry, so many great places.
And as families, I always like to recommend, you mentioned, Natalie, that they can call in to the counseling center for consultation. And there's a line of information and discussion that you can have. But I always do like to remind families that if they don't know where to start, I'm more than happy within my office to work with you to help you kind of noodle through some suggestions and services that you can recommend to your student as well, as a resource. So please don't ever hesitate to shoot an email over to me at parents@villanova.edu or call me directly. It's all on the web. Those services are available, and I'm more than happy to help connect you to make those recommendations to your student as well. So I think that we covered just about all the questions. If things do come up, you're always welcome to email us at parents@villanova.edu for questions. If you have suggestions for other topics, whether it's related to the counseling services or resilience, or topics that you'd like to learn more about too, we're always open to this. Please go ahead and feel free to send an email. I'm always interested in that discussion and that growth for our office and for our families. Dr. Edmond, thank you very much for your time. It's a beautiful day here on campus. Our students are buzzing around. I think there was just a happy birthday being sung in the hallway here. So I hope that wherever you are, you're enjoying your day, that you've picked up some great information in how to continue supporting your student, your loved one here at Villanova. And as always, thanks so much for being here and for keeping the conversation going between your home and Villanova University. So Dr. Edmond, thanks again, and have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Take care, everyone.